I want to welcome you to the fourth of 7 sessions about business planning for agritourism enterprises. My name's Lisa Chase, and I'm with University of Vermont Extension and the Vermont Tourism Research Center. And we are fortunate that this webinar is hosted jointly by the Global Agritourism Network and the National Extension Tourism Agritourism Working Group. Funding for this workshop and other activities related to business planning for agritourism enterprises comes from a generous grant from the Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Center. Today, we are focusing on management and operations, and I'm going to introduce our presenter in just a moment. But before we dive into today's topic, I want to take a moment to check in with the folks here in the virtual space with us. I know many of you have been joining us all along for this business planning journey. And so I'm curious to know how it's going. I've launched a poll and it says, "How's your business plan going?" I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And it looks like, by and large, the majority, over 60%, have started and are working on it. And we even have a small percent, 10%, that are all caught up. Some of you are still planning on doing it, and that's fine if you're just hanging in here, not working on a business plan and learning as we go. I am now going to turn it over to our presenter today, who is Dee Singh Knights. She is a professor with the West Virginia University Extension Service, and for the last 12 years, she has specialized in the areas of agribusiness, economics, and management, with the goal of contributing to the development of sustainable agricultural production systems through research, teaching, and extension education. She works throughout West Virginia and around the US and around the world on a variety of issues, including local food systems, food safety, business planning, risk management, agritourism and sustainable agriculture, and other issues related to food systems. And she coordinates programs such as the West Virginia Agritourism Initiative, the West Virginia Women in Agriculture Training and Outreach Program, the West Virginia Beginning Farmer and Mentorship Program, as well as food safety. And the first time I met Dee was actually at a conference in Vermont. I'm trying to remember. It was certainly more than 10 years ago. I believe it was at Shelburne Farms. And Dee was there presenting on business planning. And since that first meeting, we have worked collaboratively in the US and around the globe to help people with business planning and other aspects of agritourism. So I'm very excited that Dee was able to make time in her crazy busy schedule and join us today. Dee, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Lisa. And one thing you omitted to say is when you met me, we both look the same today as we did back then. So I just wanted to mention that. But thank you guys for joining us today. I am so pleased to be putting in my 2 cents into this whole spectrum of business planning activities. Just one word of caution, I am not an HR specialist, although today we will be speaking about management and organization and all of those stakeholders in our businesses, right? Typically, my role really is as an agribusiness economics and management specialist is really to help our small farms increase their sustainability and viability and profitability, right? And so helping them move from that production orientation to a profitability focus, which will include farm diversification into agritourism. And we'll talk about the importance of the human resources aspect of our agritourism operation in this session of planning for your business. So to just recall what we have learned about business planning so far, and why are we doing this in the first place, right? So remember, when we do this formal business planning, we really want you to think about that agritourism activity in the big picture, right? And really to begin with the end in mind, understand, where am I heading, right? The business plan, while the ag plan template is just that, it gives you suggestions, it gives you sort of a framework for developing your business plan. Remember, at the end of the day, the business plan should reflect what you want to tell your stakeholders about your business, right? So think about, why am I doing my business plan in this way? And that's kind of going to tell you, what should I put into my business plan? So just in a nutshell, the business plan is really supposed to stimulate you to think about that future. As I said, begin with the end in mind and provide that structure for your decision making, right? Sort of like a guardrail to prevent you from going off the edge, right? To better help you to understand, changes your business might be facing, where you're starting from, to provide those benchmarks so you can understand how you're progressing, clarify your goals, test some of these ideas on paper. Most importantly, and this is going to resonate a lot when we speak about the human aspect of your business, is an important aspect of business planning is really to facilitate communication with all of your stakeholders. That could be your employees, which might be your family, your business partners, your lenders, other stakeholders, might be agencies that support your business, and so on. We'll talk about today the importance of recording all of these successful working models as a way to document what you're doing, so that in the event something were to happen, your successors would have a record of what model did you use and where was that key piece of information, right? So I will stress that as we go through the session today. Again, business planning, coordinating decision making, documenting your ability to manage, plan, and communicate. So if the main goal of your business plan is really for that lender, the lender wants to see that you have the bits and pieces in place to make this a successful operation, right? If your business plan is mostly for you and your partners in your business to understand what is it going to take to make this business work, well, then you want to be able to document it for those specific stakeholders, rather. And again, helping you to improve your decision making, also to really focus in on what makes your business successful. What is your competitive advantage? And when anybody who this business plan relates to, when those people read this business plan, they should understand what is unique about your business. What is your competitive advantage? So I want you to remember that as a big lesson, and I'll refer to that as I go through. So again, this section in AgPlan is about management and organization. It pertains to the people aspect of the business. So it relates back to, how are we structuring our business? How are we organizing? Are we a corporation, sole proprietorship, partnership? What are we? How are we organizing? And one of the things is that, oftentimes we're so focused on the production aspect of our business, right? That the personal management side can sometimes be overlooked, especially on a small farm, right? However, if you want to attract, if you want to retain good employees, including your relatives and the neighbor's kid down the street, you have to have a plan in place to do that, right? So you should be able to describe, who are the people involved at different levels of the business, how, they contribute to, as I said, that competitive advantage, how, how you're going to keep a plan in place to keep your business always staffed with the right people. That's really what we're going to talk about today. So, again, we know that people make a business successful, right? You can't operate on just a farm with cool things to see, right? But without the people aspect, how are we going to interact with our various publics, right? So, this section of AgPlan really helps you hone in on who are the people that make my business successful, who will manage the business from the decision making perspective, who will provide the operational labor, the day-to-day labor, and basically how do we do it? So what is our model really? So we can talk about, whenever we start talking about the nitty-gritty, the number of personnel that's necessary, what are the necessary skills and expertise we have to put in place? How do we schedule them throughout the year? Okay. How do we, how do we recruit them, and how do we train them, and how do we retrain them, and how do we release them when they don't work out, right? So to prevent any lawsuits and things like that, those are important. And again, remember, this has to mirror your goals and objectives, right? So everything I think in the business plan has to mirror everything else. If you have certain goals and objectives that you want to achieve, then your management plan has to mirror that. You have to have the people in place, right? Your financial plan, which we will talk about in the next session, it has to mirror your management plan, right? So how are you going to pay for those people, and how are you going to pay for everything else? And then your marketing plan has to mirror everything else, right? When we talk about the big picture, that's what we mean. Everything has to match, and we have to have all of the different resources together. One of the other thing that is really important, especially about agritourism, so people are important to any business, but especially to agritourism. The thing that separates an agritourism operation from a typical farm operation really is the customer experience, right? It's that interaction with the customer for that, transfer of information, transfer of education, right? So we like to say in agritourism, the memory of these unique agritourism experiences is or now becomes the product or the service you're selling. You're no longer like my two friends here. They're from Family Roots Farm. They're based in Wellsburg, West Virginia. And so this family farm is no longer selling strawberries or maple syrup, but they're selling this experience to come and have a maple syrup breakfast at their farm. And so it's that experience. And what is critical to that experience is your human resources. So when we talk about agritourism, it's really that human resource that's your greatest assets to achieving those business goals. And so I said for typical, really small farms, we tend to overlook that because, well, face it, in small farms, we might be the only management that there is, right? Or myself and my spouse, or myself and my spouse and my two kids that are under 10 years old, right? But management and organization is important for large businesses and small businesses equally, right? So when we talk about organization and management, AgPlan sort of lays out these sections for you. Again, they're really templates, they're really suggestions. You can make it your own, but we'll cover this session in these different sections. We'll talk about the management team. We'll talk about the advisory board, and whether you're large or small, you can have an advisory board. We'll talk about the personal plan. We'll talk about volunteers, interns, apprentices, mentees under that section. We'll talk about professional services and then the importance of a succession plan. Again, remember that So you might be looking at this and what, like, wow, do I have to do all of that in my business plan? Remember, your business plan is a living document, right? So you're going to start somewhere. And I'm so happy to see so many of you guys have actually started. And remember, start somewhere, start the planning process. And as you continue, you're going to add to that. It's going to live. It's going to continuously evolve. It's going to continuously change. And one thing I always tell my producers and my agritourism operators, do not let the perfect get in the way of the very good or good enough. Okay, so start somewhere. The important thing is to start because, as we said, all of the advantages, all of the reasons for business planning in the earlier slide, they do have significant advantages to your business. So let's start talking about your management team, right? So, who are the people that manage the business, that make the businesses overall decisions, those really big items, right? Um, who are those people? And you know, what are their roles? What are their qualifications, right? And again, if you're doing your business plan for a lender, for example, then that lender is going to look at this section and say, do you have the expertise, the qualifications, the strengths to run this business based on the model that you are proposing to do, right? So the lender is going to look, they're going to say, oh, we need some key management, we need certain skills. And so it's important while you talk about the qualifications of your management team, you talk about how those qualifications brings strength to your business and how that's going to help you to achieve your competitive advantage. So you can say, oh, well, I am the main manager. I make the big decisions, or myself and my husband. We have PhDs in production economics from West Virginia University. Okay, great, you're a PhD, but what skill does that bring to my business, right? Those are the things that you want to point out to the lender. The lender is not necessarily going to be, oh, wow, blown away by the fact that your top management has a PhD. It's like, what does that PhD do for your business? That is what is important, right? So make those connections. For you, if the business plan is just to help communicate, you know, your business model to you know, to your employees and your other management, let's say it's your cousins and so on, again, that those strengths become really important, right? So describe who, you know, who the management is, what the qualifications are, and why is that important to the business, right? So this is an activity that we basically want you to take some time to do. Maybe, you know, while I talk, if you can multitask, what are some of the crucial management activities that occurs on your farm? We want you to think about what are the things, the big picture items, not necessarily the day-to-day operations. We're going to come to those, but the big things, right? You know, where are we getting the finances? I need somebody in charge of the finances, right? I need somebody to track all of these sales and to manage invoices and payments of our bills, but also get the money from our customers, make sure we don't have too much accounts receivables. I need somebody to manage the farm operations, to make sure that I have the activities ready for when I have my agritourism experiences. I need somebody to be that emergency and crisis manager and that PR person. What are the big things, right? And then we need to make sure that we're understanding from a management perspective who on our team are going to handle those kinds of big decisions, right? So who completes those tasks on your farm? The second level of your management and organization team, one of the things that we want you to consider is your advisory board. Okay, so I'm going to say that this is the people who you turn to for advice. Big businesses will have maybe a formal advisory board, right? That might be made up of people, they might even, sell shares in their business, things like that, right? Typical for a big business. Um, Last summer, we had the chance to visit Eckerd's, which is a really large agritourism operation, over 300 employees annually, and so on. Maybe they have a very formal um, uh, advisory board. The thing with when you have a really large advisory board, one of the things, so you can list what the advisory, who the advisory board is and what their functions are of each individual, or what the function of the board is. But as a lender, the lender also wants to know, how do you create consensus on this board? How do you figure out, how do you get everybody to agree on where you go, right? So that's important as well. Now, for small businesses, you're like, well, I don't have an advisory board. I'm here to tell you, yes, you do. You may not realize that you have an advisory board, but you do. Who are the people you turn to for advice? Who is your informal board of directors? It might be your local extension specialist like myself. You turn to and you say, hey, Dee, listen. So, right now, last week, yeah, today's Tuesday. So, last Friday, one of my strawberry producers who have fantastic U-Pick events and on-farm events with her strawberry operation. When she took off the winter covers of her strawberry plants, guess what? No plants. They were decimated. Apparently, there was a disease just before they put on the covers, and they didn't realize that it destroyed their plants over the winter. So when they took their covers off, guess what? She has no strawberry operation this year. How does she pivot? She calls me up, Dee. I'm in deep trouble. What do we do? I'm on her informal board of directors. You get me? It might be a local, soil conservation expert. It might be a local tourism person. So you do have a board of directors, informal board of directors for you small businesses. It might be your business partner. It might be another farmer or another agritourism operator that you turn to for advice, right? So in West Virginia, we encourage, and we have the West Virginia Agritourism Association, which are other stakeholders in that agritourism space, actual operators, but also support agencies. And we encourage our operators to use the agritourism operation as if it's your own personal sounded board of advisors, right? So you can sound ideas and challenges and, seek best practice, like how do you guys deal with these challenges? So large or small, you do have a board of advisors. So you want to basically indicate on your business plan, where do you go to for advice to stay ahead of the game, okay? The third part of that management and organization part of AgPlan pertains to your personal plan. So these are the everyday operating labor force, right? Who manages the business on a day-to-day perspective, who manages, which employees are going to turn up today, what products are we selling, how do we display them, those kinds of things. So this describes the role of your business's workforce, aligns the staffing needs with whatever is happening on the operation at that given time. You know, um, Sometimes, remember, sometimes it's just you and two other people. Sometimes it's a large, like I say, Eckerd's, it's a large 300 employee operation, right? So you have to consider who are the people, what are their roles, what are their responsibilities, what will they be responsible for? So sometimes that's planned in advice, some in advance rather. Sometimes you just make that up on the fly, right? But the important thing is to let people know you're here today, this is what you're responsible for. So again, when we're planning, from a business planning perspective, you can lay that out. What will you need on a daily basis? And then on a given basis, you might assign that to Sarah and assign this other responsibility to Tim, for example, right? But you have to have a game plan in advance, and that should be part of your business plan. The other thing that you might consider is, as we're always changing, we might be scaling up, scaling back, depending on the season, depending on what types of activities we have. You always have to think about the number of employees, right? How many people do I need to make this work? And then if you're thinking of scaling up for the next season, like becoming larger, not just within a given season, but from season to season, you have to think about what additional tasks are going to be important and how do I staff that? And where are you going to get the labor from, right? I know in West Virginia, we have a really big issue with accessing labor, available labor, especially seasonal labor, right? And so you have to think about where am I going to turn to secure that labor. Very important considerations. So again, in terms of the personnel plan, you may get as detailed as you want. So your personal plan may include, job descriptions, what, for the different roles from a day-to-day perspective, what do you need these individuals to do? How are you going to compensate? How are you going to incentivize them to always, do their best and then go beyond that, right? Do you want to have an employee handbook? Do you want to have specific training procedures for your employees? For example, if you have sort of a you pick or you're doing farm to table dinners, food safety and handling and preparation might be really crucial to your business. And in that case, you might want to specify, what your training procedures are, right? So again, remember, think about what is unique to your business and how are you're creating this business model for success. One of the things I really want to urge you to think about, a side benefit to your business plan is, how do you record things so that in the event of those 4Ds that can happen, that can potentially derail your business. And when we talk about the 4Ds to business, we're talking about death, divorce, disability, and disaster. When those four things happen, or one of the four things, oh my gosh, hopefully all four doesn't happen at the same time, right? But if any of those happen and you were top management and all that information was up here, then your successor really is like, what is the game plan, right? So always think of your business plan as a way to document your standard operating practice, basically, right? To document how do you what are the important things you consider on this farm and how do you do it? How do you put these things in place? What is the game plan? So if you were not there, your successor will have that standard operating practice, will know what the game plan is, so they can continue the business until you get back or in your absence, right? So that's really important. And I have, so again, the personal plan must be, how are you going to manage that asset? So you can go as, as cursory or as detailed as you want. I have this cool little slide I use whenever I talk about human resource risks in my training with my agritourism operators. I help them to understand, listen, what you do when you're hiring and training and so on can have detrimental impacts on your business. So, for example, if you have an inadequate workforce, or if you don't train your employees correctly, or there is poor communication, or poor workplace conditions, or God forbid, you have a migrant labor force or anything like that, and you're not complying with laws and regulations, that can lead, that can bear some fruits. And it's not going to be, I should have chosen a different color for my apples because this means it's nice and juicy, right? But the issues that these conditions can create can be detrimental. There can be a lot of turnover, low productivity, high cost of operation, injuries, fines, lawsuits, things you don't want, right? So, as part of your personal plan, you might want to consider, how do I do these things? What plans do I want to put in place to avoid these issues, right? Again, your business plan is a living document. So start someplace, identify the personnel, and then fill in the gaps as you go along. Okay. The other set of people that might be involved on your farm, for some of you, um, volunteers, those people who, the free labor, you're like, oh, do you want to experience what it's like to pick grapes on a vineyard? Come out this Saturday evening, right? We're picking grapes. So those are your volunteers, right? I know a lot of our operations here in West Virginia survive on volunteer um, labor, right, on volunteer services, because they understand this is part of their community. They contribute their time, but you know, how do you train them? There's that old saying that you get what you pay for. So if you don't train your volunteers, right, it can derail your business, right? And so you have to let the volunteers understand. Listen, when you come on on my operation, these are the things that are important. Maybe food safety, maybe being courteous to the customers and all of that. So they have to make sure they're abiding by the standards you set, and there might be training necessary. You might also have basically apprentices, right? Those are people that are, they're paid, those are paid positions that might eventually lead to full employment. You might have interns. Interns are often, interns or mentees, those are often unpaid and may not necessarily lead to full employment. So again, it doesn't matter what you call them. If there are people on your farm, you want to make sure that they understand the standards of practice on your farm as if it was a paid employee. And so if you're relying on volunteer services, you want to make sure that you have the numbers available. Where am I going to get these volunteers and so on? If that is a crucial part, if certain parts of the business depends on those volunteers or those apprentices or those interns, you want to make sure that you have a plan in place to secure those, so that you would have the operating labor that you actually need. Turning our attention to professional service. What professional services do you use? How crucial is it to your business? So, for example, let's say you do not have permanent bathrooms and you're depending on porta johns for your event. Let me tell you, that is a crucial service. You want to make sure that you have a plan A, B, and a backup plan C to make sure that that is available for your guests, right? So, what are the professional services you use? And are their services essential? And how will you? What is your plan B in the event that you lose their service? That is really, really important. Some other, well, I'm not going to give you that hint, but we want you to think about, who are the crucial professional services. And again, remember I said earlier, you want to document the game plan, right? This is one of those crucial pieces of information. Like if something happens to dad, and dad was the crucial or the key, manager, he knew everything in his head. He didn't write it down. And something happened to dad, but we have to carry on this agritourism operation in his absence. Like, oh, those Porter John people, I don't know what their names are, and I don't know how we worked out the contract to service these and those kinds of things. So make sure you're recording those with a view to, having a record of the standard operating practice so you can continue the operation if your top management is absent for any period, right? So, on that note, we want to ask you to tell us what professional services do you use for your enterprise? Might be accountants, might be your insurance providers, really, really important. Professional service might be facility rentals that I just mentioned. Do you have any educators, right? Do they come on? Do you offer classes on your farm and you have these educators? And they might even also be your volunteers, right? Chefs, any other type. And if you have some others, you can probably type that into the chat to let us know what those are. Yeah, so we see a lot of insurance providers. We're really happy that you guys recognize insurance providers as vital. And your accountants, we do want to make sure that we are keeping up with our Schedule Fs and Schedule Cs for those of us in the US. Yeah, so wonderful. So you guys are recognizing your professional services. Make sure you are recording that as well on that business plan. Again, if this is for your lender, remember they're going to want to know that you have the pieces in place to make your business model successful. Another thing that in terms of not necessarily professional services, but in terms of business partners, I like to also say so a lot of agritourism operations might be smaller type operations that really depend on other business partners to help you to create that experience, right? So I like to have my agritourism operators detail also who are your business partners. Who are the people you're also in business with? That can be people who support your operation, people, businesses. And when I say support, I mean like what other products do they have that you need to add value to your product? So if you're doing on-farm dinners and you don't have your own vegetables or your own meat, where are those that meat or the produce coming from? That's an essential support business for you, right? An essential partner. Sometimes you have other operations that or other business partners that complement your operation. So, what do they offer that you can team up with to make the experience at your farm even better? So, for example, if I'm a maple syrup producer, I might be partnering with a restaurant to prepare a maple inspired meal at their restaurant. So it's a complementary type operation, right? Important business partner. Or it might be somebody that might supplement your operation. So, what do they offer that you do not have, but you know that that experience is going to make the visitors all around visit to your region that much more enjoyable. So you might like let's stick with the maple syrup example, right? So they might come out for a maple day at your farm or a maple 2 hours, and then they visit the next livestock farm for a nice educational tour. Or, let's say you really only have the Porta Johns, but you know the livestock farm has wonderful bathrooms and so on. That's the partner you want that is going to supplement your operation so people have the benefit of using that that wonderful bathroom. So again, it doesn't matter what if they're support or complementary or supplementary, be sure to include the business partners that is going to help you to achieve your competitive advantage. The other part, and we do have a poll question on your succession plan and why is your succession plan important? And it's never too early to start thinking about your succession plan. So we have a lot of people who are working on it. Some of you have, and again, if you don't, it's okay. You can start planning for in the eventuality that you are no longer going to be there. How does this, what is that exit plan for you? And how does that business continue to operate in your absence? So wonderful. We see that there are a lot of people actually have one or working on it, right? And again, for the succession plan, I want to iterate that all of the parts of the business plan, not just the management plan, part of the plan, but when we talk about the financials and the marketing aspect, all of those are so important record pieces for your succession plan, right? Because, you know, people want to have a working plan for what am I going to do if I'm going to continue this operation. They certainly want to understand the financial aspects. So, again, as we think about succession planning, we do want to make sure that we are understanding what do we need to put in place to have that succession plan. So first of all, what are the bodies that we need for my succession plan? But also remember the mirror images, other parts of your plan, your financial plan, your marketing plan, and so on. So here are just some examples that we took from AgPlan. So this is Lakeshore Orchard, and it's an example from them, and it kind of lays out who their key management personnel are. So again, remember I talked about earlier, you know, you can identify who these people are, you know, what are their qualifications, what qualifications and skills and expertise they bring to the business. But again, as you identify these people, I think it's really appropriate for you to address in that business plan how do those qualifications, how do those skills translate to help you to achieve your competitive advantage? Okay, so it might be that your retail store and employee manager, she knows everybody in the town, so she can source, you know, a labor, you know, a group of 5 people at a moment's notice, right? So those are the kinds of things. Or your general manager, he has worked in the industry, so he understands the trends in the market. And so he's going to be able to help you with your marketing strategies because he can predict and forecast all of these trends, right? And he's always up on what are consumers looking for. So remember, we wanted to circle back and say, what skills do they bring and how is that going to help our competitive advantage? Same thing with our advisors. We can have a list of advisors. In this case, Lakeshore has quite a number: financial, their business advisor, their business planning advisor. They have a structural advisor, right? All of these would be important to them. And again, how does those, you know, skills and what roles are these people playing on an advisory board, and how do they help us to achieve our competitive advantage? Same thing with your employees. So these are your personnel plan, right? Your day-to-day staffing needs. Who are those? And so we can tell, you know, what the number, whether they're part-time, whether they're full-time, so how many hours are they going to work. And I have added, you know, one of the things we need to really add there is what will they be responsible for? So that might not necessarily go into your business plan. There might be sort of like a secondary detail of that personal plan that includes, you know, that responsibility that again relates back to that aspect of your business plan. If you're planning on scaling up, like I talked about earlier, you know, and you're thinking, oh, next year I want to add, you know, 5 acres with a petting zoo and, you know, an educational center and so on. What will my staffing needs be? So again, this is sort of, thinking about that decision-making process for the future. And then one of the last things that you might want to add is that uh, any other information about how your human resources gives you a competitive advantage. So for example, how do they support your competitive advantage, or alternatively, does your human resource represent a compromise? Is there any weakness? For example, if you depend on, let's say, migrant labor, if you have limited access to seasonal labor, you might want to say that, but you might also want to point out in your business plan, how are you going to plan around that? Okay. Um, or if your human resources gives you a wonderful strength, and it's a wonderful asset to your competitive advantage. For example, if you are well known and well liked, and your high school students really look forward to working with you every fall for your pumpkin patch agritourism attraction, then you say that. Or if you have, your farm kids, like the Hardesty Farm in Preston County. If the kids they're in college and they're coming back to work on the farm, you want to highlight that, because that's a strength. That means you got a secure staffing plan for the future, right? So you might want to point out to the person who's viewing that business plan, and it might just be yourself, what those strengths are. And we talked about the professional services, so make sure that you're recording those, both for, because it's a vital part of your business plan. But again, remember, in the case of the 4Ds, I want to have a plan in place so my successor can access that information. So, having said all of that, we want to know. So, we've given you quite a mouthful, but in the chat, let us know, in spite of this, are you motivated? Well, not in spite of this. So, after this, are you inspired to get working on the management and organization aspect of your business plan? Or are there some things that might be holding you back, or present a barrier for you?
One question that I know came up in registration is labor right now. And, really since the pandemic, labor's always been challenging, but since the pandemic, it's been even more challenging. Someone just put into chat, labor, 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 exclamation mark. So this is a question for Dee. This is also a question for everybody else out there. If you want to drop your strategies into chat. Dee, what have you seen working best for farms in West Virginia and other places where you work? And I know we have a lot of expertise here in the virtual space with us. So if you have had good luck with high school kids, or community members, or H2A labor, or whatever else, feel free to drop into chat and share.
And I will just say something first, and then I'll pass it on if anybody wants to add to it. But in West Virginia, we use a lot of volunteers, right? So we have a lot of community groups. Maybe your homeschool students and so on that would want to come out for a day on the farm, and they contribute labor. One thing that the WVU is working on, so our university, our technical colleges, and so on, is really civic engagement with our students. So we have a whole classes of people that will come out. They will provide, customer relation support. They provide some marketing support and that kind of thing. So, using your local universities, high school, technical colleges, volunteer groups as some of your labor can really help, in that regard. It does take some careful planning and management, but it's something that we have successfully done.
So let's see. One question is interested to hear if anyone has had more good than bad experiences with woofers. And we've got some interesting responses in chat. College student internships. Good point about volunteers. One person wrote, I don't believe volunteers are an option anymore in California. There are definitely regulations around volunteers and interns that, you know, in some cases may work with the labor laws, but in other cases they don't. Another question that one person dropped into chat is there a national listing of tourism and agritourism type associations? And Kelly Hepler thankfully dropped, I was actually looking at my screen over here trying to pull up one, dropped something into chat from the Agricultural Marketing Resource Center. That's a helpful link, and I know they're actively working on it to update it. Ed Kelly also dropped another link into chat too. So there's a start at that, but there isn't yet like the one place to go to find all the information. And that's something that we collectively can work together to improve on.
And there was an answer to the woofer question. So it's been 50-50 good. And Jet said they've taken their farm off of the site. It's not been worth it for them.
So to give a little, Zach, do we either of you want to give a little background on woofers? Because I think not everybody's familiar with woof.
I would yield to you or Zach.
Okay, so it's the worldwide, I've heard a lot of different acronyms. It's WWOOF, and I've actually heard a lot of different things that it stands for. But essentially, it's unpaid interns. There's a website, and Zach dropped the link into chat. Unpaid interns that can work on farms in the US, but also around the world. So if you want to be a WOOF host, you can register as a host, and typically you do not pay the woofers anything, but you provide lodging and food in exchange for the experience. And then they work for you, you know, in a sort of a volunteer setting. And there are some guidelines in terms of, you know, how many hours they can work and how many days off they get. Zach, do you want to add to that?
I mean, it's spot on what you described, and you know, and I believe what the person left in the chat, you know, with it being 50-50. It really does just come down to you to make sure that you can properly vet the person that's coming, and everybody has different goals that they want to achieve. Sometimes there's a timing thing, sometimes they're just trying out something, and I have seen a lot of good things and I have seen a lot of bad things, but the good, you know, I actually know several people that are within my network here in Vermont that got started doing like with agriculture when by doing a woofing experience. So, but it's just really important to be careful when you're bringing someone on in many cases, but also someone that you don't know that you're just finding through a site. There are some risks involved.
Definitely. Zach, you've been quiet doing the technical support piece behind the scenes. Thank you for doing that. Do you want to chime in with any of your views? I know you have a lot of experience with management and organization, and we've got about 5 minutes left. So before we close, I just want to give Zach a chance to weigh in, some final words from Dee, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, well, in regards to like establishing a board of advisors, I you know, there are many different ways. I saw someone in the chat, you know, referring to like just how do I get started with that. There's a but also like it also comes through networking as well. Is like once you're like getting involved in your local network, you're just finding people that really do stand out. Like, I mean, that's just kind of what I've done when establishing groups of advisors for my personal well, academic and professional pursuits. Is I just notice certain people that are involved in events or activities or affinity groups or professional groups that I'm already involved in. I see those people and what they share. So that whole, like, subtle networking does allow you to identify some people that perhaps you feel just more comfortable, receiving some advisory services from. So it's always really important to do that as well. And going back to organization, it's in management, and defining the key roles for people. Like, as you're going through the ag plan process, you're defining a lot of what the business is doing or what the business wants to do, and you're seeing these enterprise areas. Well, while you're visualizing those enterprise areas, you're going to start realizing the certain types of skills and experience that are necessary to move those enterprises forward. So as you do this ag plan process, you can start putting the pieces together, based on the needs of your perceived enterprises.
Thank you, Zach. Dee, any closing thoughts before we
Yeah, no,
close
I'll
with some
just
logistics?
Yeah, I'll just follow up with what Zach says. Yeah, so the important thing is to start to record it. Remember, you can build it as you go, but you can also come back and change it. So it is an iterative process, right? So again, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good enough. Just start, okay? And that's it for me. Thanks, Lisa.
Great advice, Dee. Could you move to the next slide?
Sure.
So we've been mentioning AgPlan, and I think many of you are already working in AgPlan. When we send out an email in a few days with this recording, these slides, we'll also have a link to AgPlan if you decide you want to work in that platform. A lot of people have said it's very, very user-friendly and helpful for them, for their organization of the business plan, but it's not mandatory by any means. Could we have the next slide, Dee? So homework, those of you who have joined us before know we're on a 7-week journey here. And if you do your homework every week, at the end of this journey, you will have a draft, a complete draft. As Dee said, it's a living document. You're never ever really going to be done with it. It's always going to be something you want to revisit and go back to, but you will at least have a complete draft of your business plan if you keep up with the homework. So your assignment for this week is to focus on that management and organization section, whether it's an ag plan or whether it's on your own. And then next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about financials, and we'll be joined by Zach Smith from UVM Extension, as well as Curtis Monkey from the Center for Farm Financial Management. So they were the team that started us off with our introduction to business planning in week 1, and they're both financial whizzes. So they're coming back for the financial piece. Could I have the next slide? We know that as you're working on your business planning, you may run into challenges, whether it's the business planning content itself or whether it's with AgPlan. And so we want to mention that you are welcome to reach out to the Center for Farm Financial Management. We've got a phone number, an email address, and their website, and they are there to help you out. They've been providing extra staffing for these 7 weeks. And then final slide. Thank you for joining us. As you know, those who have been with us before, we're asking you to do a short survey, and even if you filled it out last week, we hope you'll take a few minutes and to fill it out again. Let us know how this process is working for you, what you're learning, and how we can make this a better experience for you and everybody else who's involved in the future. So that's it for today. We're at the top of the hour, and thanks to all of you for joining us on this journey of business planning for agritourism enterprises, and we hope we'll see you next week.